briefly just go back to Roseland and maybe a little bit more of what this New York City vibe was like then. The only person I've had on here talking about that before is John Joseph of the Cro-Mags.
A very excellent person to have talking about New York, because we both ran around the same circles. Back in the day, like I said, you could go out every night and see something. I do talk about this in my documentary, so if I'm repeating myself, forgive me. But for those who haven't heard it, here you go. You could go out early in the evening and go to Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden was a 20,000 seat venue. It was a union hall, so you had to be out of there by 11 o'clock. If you knew there was something happening on Avenue A or at the Cat Club on a Wednesday night, you'd catch the late shows. And you could be out every night of the week really hearing music. That's how vibrant the scene was. And if you were a little over the top and crazy and had a few drinks or so, you would go to after-hour bars, which were bars that were opened at 4 a.m. And then the next thing you know, you open the door and it's 12 noon the next day. That's how insane New York and myself, that's how insane the whole scene was.
And this was late 70s, mid 80s?
Well, I started going out in the late 70s when I was underage, but no, I'm talking more about the 80s.
Right.
Yeah, maybe early 90s.
And what was, and yeah, it was a pretty good description. What was the vibe there? I mean, still rough in the East Village.
Oh, right? Yes. I did live in the East Village. It was a rough vibe. You would think that bodega on the corner was just a bodega that sold, beer and soda. But of course, you can get cocaine there too. I remember living on East 10th Street in 1981, 82. I was walking down my street one day and I was looking and I go, wait a minute, what the heck is that in the middle of a street? And it was a car completely turned over on its top that I looked like it blew up the night before, and nobody even bothered, the city of New York or anything, nobody bothered to even pick it up for about 3 weeks.
It was just sitting in the middle of the street.
Middle of the street. That's how insane the East Village was back in the day. But also, let me quickly, even though you didn't ask, the beauty of the East Village back in the day was there was also a very vibrant art scene that people like Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring, Richard Hambleton all came out of. And that was kind of extraordinary, because then there were little pockets on side streets in the East Village where all these galleries just started nurturing new talent. And that new talent were some of the 3 names I just mentioned to you.
And Keith Haring used to draw in the subway, right?
Oh boy, did he ever.
On these like black places that used to be advertisements, and he used to draw these incredible figures. And
yes, that's right.
It's just kind of fascinating that the art scene just kind of happened there.
Yes, it did kind of happen, and it busted wide open at that point in time because of people like Keith and Jean-Michel.
And was it like population density of New York, and then like the East Village where people could squat for free?
Well, they did squat for free, right. Yes.
And is that why it happened there,
I don't know how to answer that except to say, New York has always been a creative city, and everything is cyclical. And I think it was just the time when those 3 young people were coming up that's like, wow, we haven't had this kind of excitement for such a long time. So there it is.
Yeah. And so the art with the music made a difference, because all these different kinds of creative juices are flowing, and people are thinking and feeling different ideas. And it's an exciting time, and everyone's pushing the envelope on everything.
One would hope.
One would hope. How does music cross over to like art and theater, and are they mixed? Because you've seen all
sometimes. Let's see. I don't know how much music crosses over into theater unless you're a band that has a song that perhaps the theater director wants to use in the Broadway or off-Broadway piece. Art. There's art when you put an album cover together. So I don't know.
And then like Blue Man Group was right in the East Village too.
Well, forget about Blue Man Group. They're still running.
I know.
Right now. They're in Vegas right now as well. But they're still in the East Village on Lafayette Street over 25 years now. And because it's an exciting piece to watch. So when tourists come to New York, it's one of those things to see in New York. And They've survived. It's amazing.
But that could only also come from the East Village, right? It was that vibe, maybe.
Well, yes,
You
yes.
could be
Then
creative and you could
sure
do those things.
Well, because people in the East Village, at that point in time, were being very adventurous with what they were saying and painting and doing.
And people could squat there, so you could get talent that would just move in. You know, John Joseph used to squat there. That probably made a difference, right? Because you had all these diverse types of people on top of each other being creative.
Well, I think there was a certain energy that, whether you were squatting or not, but it was like, I have to do this. You know, we can use Keith again as an example. He was a young person who had to make art. So all hours of the night, when nobody was around, or sometimes when he thought no one was around, he would take his black magic marker or big white pieces of chalk, and on these huge blank canvases, he would start making really fun, lyrical type drawings. Yeah. And sometimes he got caught by the police. And but he was also someone very, very prolific. And I believe, well, I don't believe, he died in his early 30s of AIDS. And that was the beginning of us starting to hear of young artists passing away from AIDS. Now, because he was a street artist, a lot of that stuff doesn't exist on the street anymore. But the LGBTQ Center on West 13th Street in New York City has a bathroom that it was his last mural 6 months before he died. And it's the whole four walls of this bathroom. It's very erotic, very sexual. And it works at the LGBTQ Center. And they knew not to take it down. And they kind of landmarked it. So there will always be a piece of Keith if you ever want to go to the LGBTQ Center on West 13th Street and go to the bathroom and see that mural.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful thing.
Isn't it amazing, though? He died in his early 30s and he had such an impact on the world.
Well, because he was that great. Not good. He was that great. He was that prolific. He knew that he I don't know if he knew, well, let me backtrack just for a second, forgive me. He had so much energy that he painted morning, noon, and night. Right. And it was in him that this is what I do. So he left us with a huge body of work. Yeah. Which we're lucky for.
So I moved to New York City in '93. And so
okay, not bad.
I know. I missed a lot of this by 5 or 6 years, and I always feel like I wish I'd been there a little earlier. And I was drawn to the East Village. So I worked on Wall Street, and people were like telling me, live here, but I did not want to live in the Upper East Side with all these college kids. And so I was just drawn, and I moved to, I was on 10th Ave between 3rd and 4th. So it's not that, but I could walk down to the East Village, and I always wanted to go there. I always walked east, not west. And this is when Giuliani was starting to put cops on corners.
Oh, yes.
And so at least I didn't feel so safe because I was coming from Boston. But, you know, even going down to Avenue A then was a little bit, you know, it felt weird. And Avenue B, really I wouldn't go to, and then C, just forget about it.
Well, it was very tricky.
Yeah.
It was very scary.
Yeah.
It wasn't safe. And everybody in New York knew that, and they would say it's not safe. But, you know, when people have to live somewhere and it's cheap, that's where you went. And
also, is that where the great art is sometimes?
I was just going to say, and lucky for us, that's where a lot of great art came out of.
Does it always come out of places that aren't safe?
Not necessarily that's not safe. I think when there's creativity, all kinds of creativity in big cities, whether you're in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York City, because of that creativity, art is always just going to happen in all forms.